Hey everyone, Alex here from warnoffkeys.com, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can generate a dynamic image that is going to be sent whenever someone joins the Discord that your bot is inside of. This is going to be using Canvas, and I'm going to be starting from complete scratch here using the warnoffkeys commands framework, which is something I covered in the previous video. If you haven't seen that yet, a link to it is in the description as well as on the top right of your screen right now. However, it's fairly simple to get set up, and so you can follow along with this video as well. So to start things off, I have VS Code open in an empty folder, and I'm also navigating to that folder within my terminal. I'm going to navigate into my console, and then I'm going to create a node project using npm init-y. We can also create a few files. We can do this manually through VS Code, but I'm going to do it within the terminal by saying touch index.js as well as .env. We can then install a few packages that we need: npm install discord.js, wok commands for warnoffkeys, mongoose.env spelt out like that, and finally canvas. We also want to make sure that we have a nodemon installed because we'll be using that, so we can say npm install nodemon-g. The -g is going to ensure it's installed globally across our entire machine. That way we can run it as a command within any of our projects. We can then type in nodemon, and it's going to automatically start up our project. However, nothing is actually running because our index.js is empty. So we can set up a very basic project here. Let's first start off by importing discord.js. So constant discord.js equals require discord.js. We can also import the warnoffkeys command. So const wok commands equals require warnoffkeys commands. We can also require .env and then run the config function, which is going to load everything from our .env file, which will add in some things here soon. After this, we want to make a new client. So const client equals new discord with a capital D, discord.js.client. We can then listen for when this client is ready. So client.onReady. We can then have a callback here, which will just simply console log the word ready. This way we know within our console that everything is working. We can also log in using this client, so client.login. We can pass in the environment variable for token, which is going to be stored within our .env file soon. So we can say process.env.token in all caps. We can also go into our .env file and type in token in all caps equals something here. This is where you want to actually paste in your token. I'm not going to be showing that on video, but you can just paste it in right here. We're also going to want a Mongo URI, which will equal something here as well. We want to paste in this as well for whatever your connection string is to connect to your Mongo database, because we will be needing that for this. Okay, so I went ahead and pasted my token and my Mongo connection URI into the .env file. I can then save this, and nodemon will automatically restart this, and then we see ready right here. If we go into Discord, we also see that my tutorial bot is online, which means that everything is working. So now it's time to start working on our actual functionality. So we're going to need a couple commands and also a couple features for this bot. The warnoffkeys commands package is going to help us make those, and so we can create a new instance of that by saying new warnoffkeys commands. We can pass in the client. We can now pass in the name of our commands folder, which we have not made yet, as well as the name of our features folder, which we also have not made yet. I'll be calling those commands and features. We can then make new folders here called commands, and then clicking inside the main area here to make sure we're not inside the commands folder. We can make another folder called features, and now we have both of these, which is going to hold our features, which will be our listeners, essentially listening for new joins on the Discord server, as well as our commands, which will be used to simulate joins to make it easier for us to test this, as well as how to dynamically configure which Discord will be using what welcome channel. So we'll get to those later on, but we also want to make sure that we connect to our Mongo server. We can do this by simply saying .set Mongo path. We can then pass in process.env.mongo_URI, or whatever you specify within your .env file. Also, if you want a custom prefix for this, you can say set default prefix. By default, it is an exclamation point, but you can add in whatever you want here. If you do plan on using an exclamation point, then this entire line isn't necessary, but I'll keep it here just so you have access to it within the GitHub repository. So now that we're at this stage, we now want to create a set welcome command, which is going to allow server owners to configure which channel will be sent the message in whenever a new member joins. We can go inside of our commands, we can make a new file. We'll call this set welcome, one word, all lowercase, .js, and this will automatically be set as the name of the command. We can then say module.exports is going to be an object, And within here, we want to make sure that only administrators can run this. So we can say required permissions is going to be an array. And within here, we can add in a string of administrator. And this will make sure that the only people who can run this are going to be administrators. We also want a callback function, which is going to be an asynchronous function with the message right here. And to make sure that everything is working, we're simply just going to say message.reply works. We can then save this. The bot will automatically restart. We can go inside Discord and run !set welcome. And it'll then reply with works. So that means everything is working so far. Before we continue, I'm going to make another folder in here called models. And this is going to be our schemas or our models for our Mongo collection. We can then make a new file. This will be called welcome-schema.js. And within here, we have to import Mongoose and define the schema or the blueprint of how our collection should look like. So we can say const mongoose equals require mongoose. Now we can create a new schema. So const welcome schema equals new mongoose.schema with a capital S. We can then pass in an object here, and we want to specify both the guild ID and the channel ID. Both of these are going to be strings that will be required, and so we do have to specify that these will be required strings by passing in an object. We can do this once instead of twice by saying const rec string for required string, the type is string, and required is true. Keep in mind that string has a capital S here. Now going back into our schema, we can say underscore ID is rec string, and that channel ID will also be rec string. Keep in mind that this is a lowercase d. However, if you want to, you can have an uppercase d. That is just personal preference. This underscore ID isn't very descriptive though, but this is the primary key, which is required to be spelled like this. So I'm going to add in a simple comment saying guild ID to specify that this is going to be the guild ID. We can then export this with module.exports equals mongoose.model. We can then pass in the name of our collection, which is going to be welcome canvas tutorial. We can also then pass in the schema, which is just simply welcome schema. We can then save this. I can go back into my set welcome command. And at the top, we want to import this. So const welcome schema equals require. We can go back a directory, go inside our models folder, and then access the welcome schema. This is actually going to be a fairly simple function to create. Our first goal is to gain access to the guild and the channel that this message was sent in. So we can do that by simply destructuring those properties from the message object. So we can say const guild and channel equals message. Now that we have access to those, we're wanting to use something called find one and update, which is a mongoose function that will try and update something if it exists. And if it doesn't exist, it will then insert something instead. So in order to do that, we can say await. And keep in mind that await must be used within an asynchronous function, which is probably specified async right there before the parameters. Await welcome schema.find one and update. This is going to take in 3 different objects. The first one is going to be the filter or the expression in order to find an item. This is going to just simply be the guild ID. And we specified that as underscore ID within our schema. So underscore ID will then be guild ID. The second object is going to include the same thing. The reason for this is that whenever we're going to be finding an element, if it doesn't exist, it will then enter the second object here into that collection. And so we want to ensure that we do have a specific ID set, but we also want channel ID to be channel.id. And the third object is going to say upsert is true, which is just going to tell Mongoose, make sure that we either insert or update this, aka upsert this, to make sure it is either updated or inserted into the collection. We can also let the user who ran this command know that everything worked. So message.reply welcome channel set. We can then save this. Our bot will automatically restart. I can go back into Discord and I can run !set welcome. And it's going to say welcome channel set. If I then go to that collection within my Mongo database, we then see the guild ID specified here, as well as the channel ID specified here. So that means that this is correctly saving to the database. Going back into VS Code, we now want the ability to read this information from the database whenever the bot starts up, as well as to locally store this information inside of a JavaScript map. That's going to allow us to easily access that without having to fetch it from the database, which will take more time than if we just directly fetched it from in memory. So to start off, we could say const cache equals new map. And then we also can create a new asynchronous function, which is going to be called load data. It's going to be an asynchronous function with no arguments. And then within here, we're wanting to actually load the data from the Mongo database. We also want to immediately run this function to make sure that all the data is loaded whenever the bot first starts up. So we can do this with simply load data. Now within here, we're wanting to get everything from the collection. So I can say const results equals await welcome schema dot find. This is going to return everything. We can then loop through the results. So for const result without an S of results with an S. And at this stage, let's console log what result is so we have a better idea of the object we're working with. So I can just simply say console log result, and I can save this. And within the console, here we see this object right here. The underscore ID is the guild ID, and the channel ID is specified right there as well. We could then say cache.set result._ID as result.channel ID. Now we're wanting to export a function which is going to return information from this cache depending on the provided guild ID. So at the bottom of our file, we can say module.exports.getChannelID. This is going to be a function with one parameter. The parameter is going to be the guild ID. And then we can return cache.getGuildID. So if we were to then pass in a guild ID, it would return from the cache what that specified welcome channel is, if it does exist. We also want to make sure we update this cache whenever the command is ran. So after our asynchronous function call here, we can say cache.set guild.id as channel.id. So we are updating it locally as well as in the database. So whenever the bot restarts, the correct information is also stored in the database, but also whenever we go to have a new member join within the specific guild that we're working with at the moment, then it will automatically know what information is needed when it comes to the channel ID, and it won't have to go fetch it from the database, which is just unnecessary in this case. So we can go ahead and save this. Now we're wanting to create one more command, which will make it a little easier for us to test. This one's going to be called simjoin, all lowercase, .js. And within here, we're wanting to export a function. So module.exports equals this. We can say required permissions is going to be an array with administrator. And after that, we want a callback function, which is going to have a good number of arguments here. So the first one is going to be the message. The next one will be args, which will be an array of all provided arguments. That's not necessarily relevant. The next one will be the text, which will be all of the arguments in a single string. Again, this one isn't relevant. And the last one that we will need is going to be the client, which is relevant. So at this stage, we can say client.emit. We could then emit or fire or run, whatever terminology you want to use, a actual event here. We want guild member add, and we're going to pass in message.member. This is going to simulate a join for whoever ran this, and that's why we're going to require the administrator permission so other people who are not admins cannot run this command. We can then save this. I'm going to then go into my features folder, and I'm going to make a new file called welcome.js. Within here is going to be all of our logic of listening for new members, creating the dynamic image, and then sending that image inside of our desired welcome channel for the guild that we're in. So we have to export a function here, module.exports. This function will have one parameter, which is the client. And within here, we can create our listeners. So I can say client.on guild member add. We're then going to have access to our member, and I'm going to just simply console log member.user.tag. I can then save this. This will automatically restart. I can go back into my Discord and I can run !simjoin. And it's then going to fire that actual guild member add event for the user that ran the command. In this case, that's me. And then the welcome.js file, which we just wrote, is then going to console log the tag of the user, which is my username, and then the 4 numbers at the end. So at this stage, we know that our simulate join command is working. We also know that we can correctly listen for new joins. The last step is to actually create the image that we want and to then send that image. And a quick disclaimer, I am not good at graphic design at all, so this is going to be a very basic example that doesn't really look too good, but hopefully I can explain the concepts that are required in order for you to then create something better. So going back into VS Code, we are going to need a background image, and the official Discord.js documentation for how to create a canvas welcome message does have a background image that we can use. A link to that will be found in the video description. So I just downloaded that, and here we see background.png, which is this basic space thing. We can go ahead and close that. And now at the top of our file, we can go ahead and import canvas. So const canvas with a capital C equals require canvas. We also can import something from Discord.js. that something is going to be message attachment, which is going to be used to attach the image that we create to an actual message. We also need to import path from path, which is going to be included with Node.js by default. And then finally, we need to import the get channel ID function so we can require this from commands / set welcome. And so now we can destructure the get channel ID function right there. Next, instead of console logging here, we want to gain access to the guild property of the member object, so we can simply destructure that from the member object just like this. We also then want to gain access to the channel ID from this guild. So const channel ID equals get channel ID passing in guild.id. We want to make sure that this actually exists. So if not channel ID, we want to make sure that we return. With this said, if someone joins a Discord that does not have this set up, then it will not cause any errors or problems with your bot. It's just going to essentially ignore that Discord. Next, we want to gain access to the actual channel. So const channel equals guild.channels.cache.get. We can then pass in the channel ID. We also want to make sure that this exists because it is possible for the channel to be deleted since the server owner has actually configured it. So if not channel, we also want to return. After this, we're going to create a canvas object. So const canvas with a lowercase c equals canvas with the uppercase c dot create canvas. We can then pass in the width and the height. This is going to be 700 and 250. Obviously, you can enter whatever values you want. Next, we want to get the 2D context of this canvas object, which is going to say const ctx for context equals canvas.getContext and pass in the string 2D. Now we can load the background image, const background equals await, which is why this function needs to be asynchronous if it's not already. So make sure that your event listener is asynchronous. So await canvas with a capital C dot load image. We can then pass in path.join __ dir name and then back1 background.png. We can then specify using let the x value, which is 0, and y, which is 0, and we can then use the context to draw the image at those specific locations using the draw image function. We can pass in the background, we can pass in x, and we can pass in y. Next, we need to attach this image to a message attachment. So const attachment equals new message attachment. We can then specify canvas.toBuffer. If I minimize my console here, we now see toBuffer. Then we can say channel.send, an empty string, but then the attachment is the second argument. We can then save this, and going back into Discord, I'm going to go into the general channel and I'm going to say !simjoin. And it's going to then send a message in welcome, which is then going to be our background right here. Next up, we want to display the user's profile picture at the center of the image, and then also welcome the user's name, and then say how many members the Discord currently has. Let's start off by centering the user's profile picture. So going back over here, let me move my console out of the way. After we create the background, I can then say const pfp for profile picture equals await canvas with a capital C dot load image. We could then pass in member.user.display avatar URL being in all caps. This is going to be a function that will return the URL to the user's profile picture. However, Canvas, at least as of recording this video, does not support WebP as an image format, and that's the default image format that Discord provides. So within an object here, we can specify the format as PNG. Afterwards, we're wanting to redefine X and Y, and that's why we use the let on line 26 and 27 right here. Instead of const, we could then say X equals canvas.width divided by 2 minus profile picture.width divided by 2. This is going to then center the actual profile picture on the x-axis. We also want to do the same concept with the y-axis. So y equals canvas.height divided by 2 minus profile picture.height divided by 2. I could then draw this with ctx draw image. We can specify profile picture and then the x and the y. I can then save this. We see our bot is restarting. Going back to Discord, I can go inside general and simulate a join. We then see a new message, and here we see the profile picture directly in the center. So the next step is going to be moving the profile picture slightly up and then displaying 2 lines of text and also adjusting the font size and the font style for those pieces of text. Let's go back into VS Code And instead of y being the actual center here, I'm just going to set y to 25. Afterwards, I'm going to then try and draw the text that's going to say welcome to the user. So let's start off by setting the color of the text. So ctx.fill style is going to be a hex code of white, so FFF. Afterwards, we can say ctx.font is going to be a string, which is 35 pixels, sans-serif. We can then create a text variable using let. So let text equals a template literal. We'll then say welcome and then member.user.tag. We now want to make sure that the text is centered, and similar to the previous concept, we're wanting to take the width of the canvas divided by 2 minus the width of the text, in this case, divided by 2. We can easily do this with x equals canvas.width divided by 2 minus context.measureText. We can then pass in the text variable .width divided by 2. We can then say ctx.fillText. We can pass in the text. We can pass in the x variable. The y value for this specific use case will be 60 plus the profile picture height. We can then save this. Going back into our welcome channel, I can run simulate join. And we now see welcome Alexander Flores with the actual numbers there. So next we want to display underneath this how many members there are in the current Discord. This will be a very similar concept to what we just did. We first want to adjust the font size to be a little smaller. So ctx.font is going to then equal 30 pixels sans-serif. We can then say the text, which is why we use let, because we want to reassign a value to this variable. Text equals a template literal, member number, and then we're looking to insert in guild.member count. We could then reassign a value to x, which is going to be the same exact line right here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. This will then measure the new text, which we just assigned right here. Afterwards, we can actually draw this to the canvas using the context.fillText method. We can then pass in the text, the x, the y will be 100 plus the profile picture height. We can then save this, which will restart our bot. Going back in here, we can run simulate join. And we then see member number 2, because we only have 2 people within the Discord. So if a third person joined, it would automatically send this and it would say member number 3 because there are currently then 3 members in the Discord. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm not too good at graphic design, so obviously this doesn't look too good, but hopefully you can understand the concepts with this video on how to draw images at specific locations, as well as how to draw text of specific colors and sizes using Canvas within Discord.js. Thanks for watching this Discord.js tutorial. If you want to learn more about Discord.js, consider clicking on the playlist you see on your screen now. If you need help, feel free to leave a comment or ask in the Worn Off Keys Discord, which can be found in the video description.